Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last episode of the Whole Food Plant Based Lifecycle Nutrition Series. In this episode, we are going to do a little summary and talk about the big take home lessons from this series. I'd like to share in this episode my reflections from creating this series because, it's brought up a lot of really interesting topics to think about in terms of being a parent, but also just really interesting topics to bring up in this discussion of talking about, the appropriateness of plant-based nutrition throughout all phases of life, which, I will go ahead and say, yes, whole food plant-based eating is completely 100% appropriate for all phases of life. And not only appropriate, but so health promoting. The only thing that we need to consider is that there are some nutrients that we may have to, just put a little bit more thought into to make sure that we are covering those bases in the whole food plant-based lifestyle. So in today's episode, as I said, I want to do just a little review, a little summary of, some of the highlights from each episode that we talked about or that we went through in this series, and also just share my other kind of take home thoughts, things that maybe I didn't have enough time to talk about in any of our previous episodes. And so if you've been with us in this series so far, you know that we started with preconception and have moved through pregnancy, then the lactation phase, breastfeeding phase for the mother, and then also infant nutrition, toddler nutrition, and nutrition for kids, adolescents, and teenagers. And that's where we are currently today. I'm going to talk about, how the nutrition changes also when we enter official adulthood. And we'll talk about really what the big differences are between, pediatric nutrition and adult nutrition, which, all in all, there's really not too much that's different, just a few little nuances here and there, right? But yeah, so let's go back to that first episode where we were talking about preconception and really why whole food plant-based eating is so helpful in this phase. And really so much of it comes down to the fact that whole food plant-based eating is so nutrient dense and very healthy and supportive of detox pathways. And there's so much research coming out showing the connection between environmental toxicity, bioaccumulating in our bodies, and how that is impacting fertility and supporting, our reproductive health. And so, really whole food plant-based eating is the most detoxifying way that we can eat, but also just creates great nutritional stores for, preparing the body for this big event of growing and then also feeding a human baby. So yes, whole food plant-based eating is wonderful in the preconception phase. And of course, this is also where you'd want to bring in a prenatal. You want to double check that you're getting enough folate, but of course you will be in a whole food plant-based diet as long as you're eating great leafy greens. So then moving into the pregnancy phase or the pregnancy episode that we talked about, really some of the big take homes that we talked about in this pregnancy phase is that, having that prenatal is just a great assurance policy, making sure that you are getting the folate, the choline, the, some amount of iron in there, some amount of B12 in there. However, it's also really important for for plant-based or vegan pregnant moms to make sure that they're supplementing with vitamin B12. Also, you'd want to be supplementing with enough vitamin D, and also supplementing with omega-3 fatty acids from algae oil is really, really helpful during pregnancy. Also, making sure that you're getting enough calcium is going to be really helpful for your own bone health moving forward, into the postpartum and lactation phase of life as well, because calcium is definitely one of those minerals that we can sacrifice in our own body to make sure that our babies are getting enough calcium for their bones, or there's enough calcium in our breast milk. So making sure that you are getting a good, at least 1,000 milligrams of calcium every day is very, very helpful. Also in this pregnancy phase, of course, in any phase of life, and you're going to hear me say this several times in this episode today, with whole food plant-based eating, it is a very healthy and health promoting way of life as long as we are eating enough. eating enough calories, because when we eat enough calories from whole plant foods, we'll be eating enough vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients and fiber and all the good stuff that we need to support the body's healing processes. But when we're pregnant, we obviously need to eat more because we are in this growth phase of life. And so what that means is, eating more calories, and that could look like just eating more of the wonderful foods that you ate before getting pregnant, the good whole foods. But it could also mean bringing in a few more kind of calorie dense foods or convenient foods that are more calorie dense. For example, bringing in maybe more nuts, seeds, avocados, coconut than you did prior to being pregnant, or maybe even bringing in some whole grain breads and whole grain pastas and legume pastas and things like this can really be helpful in also increasing the calorie intake without increasing so much fiber intake, which can sometimes make pregnant women feel very full, especially because they have less room in their abdomens. Also, of course, in this pregnancy episode, we talked about just really giving yourself grace, really being compassionate with yourself, and knowing that with shifting, food cravings, food aversions, levels of appetite, nausea, all of that stuff, it might be hard to eat 100% whole food plant-based, but, not to be hard on yourself or criticize yourself, to just do the best you can, right? Then shifting into the postpartum lactation discussion here, we talked about, once again, how whole food plant-based eating is wonderful and nourishing for this time of life. And for me, I certainly experienced zero problems with breastfeeding or milk production, and my recovery from delivering was so easy and graceful and beautiful. And I truly, truly thank my nutrition and my good nutritional stores for this easy transition. But the nutrients that we want to be aware of when we are breastfeeding are iodine, vitamin B12, omega-3 fatty acids, calcium, and of course there are more. But these are the nutrients that our babies depend on us to get in our diet in order for us to impart that into our breast milk. Calcium is an exception, actually, but iodine we need to get from our diet. And so for that reason, it's really helpful to just continue taking a prenatal when we're breastfeeding. Also, the prenatal covers a lot of other bases in terms of just, upping our nutrition intake. Vitamin B12, we need to continue to take a good dose of vitamin B12 to make sure our babies get that in their breast milk. And omega-3 fatty acids, we need to get a good source of DHA internally ourselves in order for that to get into the breast milk for our babies. Like I said, there are quite a few other nutrients where our diet really depends on, creating a good amount of those nutrients in our breast milk for the baby. But generally, those nutrients are very abundant in our plant-based diet and easy to get, as long as we are focusing on our whole plant foods and eating enough. So important. Calcium, interestingly, like I said, calcium is one of those minerals that our body will sacrifice our own calcium stores in order to make sure enough calcium gets into the breast milk for our babies. But in this phase of life, we also start giving our baby a direct supplement of vitamin D, because mother's milk does not have a reliable source of vitamin D. This highly depends on the mother's vitamin D status. And hypothetically, if the mother does have good vitamin D status, is supplementing regularly, then there should be enough in her baby's milk. But it is just a general recommendation across the board for the baby to get their own vitamin D supplement at this phase. So then this is a great segue into talking about infant nutrition between the ages of 0 and 6. In this episode, we talked about, mother's milk, how it really is the perfect food, the perfect fuel for babies, except for that, it's been shown to be beneficial for them to get that direct vitamin D supplement, 400 IU to be exact. And then, of course, if breastfeeding is an issue for the mother, if milk production is an issue for the mother, then of course the only really alternative would be a commercial formula. And as a reminder, there's no detriment to choosing a soy-based formula over a cow milk formula if the family is wanting to stay plant-based in that kind of situation. But the only other kind of interesting nutritional consideration in this age range is iron, and the debate between whether to supplement with iron between the ages of 4 to 6 months before iron-rich foods are introduced into the diet. And currently, the AAP says that this is a good time to talk about that discussion with your pediatrician, talk about the risk factors for the baby developing a deficiency in iron, for example, if they were preterm, or if maybe they had early cord clamping. There's certain factors that we talk about in the podcast episode that could increase the risk of iron deficiency in this age. But just so that many other countries around the world, Canada, I believe Australia, I forget the list, they don't recommend supplementing with iron before the age of 6, just showing that it's not necessary and might actually, some studies have shown that there might actually be a slight, increased risk of infections and some other kind of negative effects from that. So just something you'd want to talk with your doctor around this age. And then when we start introducing solids, when the baby is around 6 months or so, then, so much more of this nutritional conversation, so many more nutrients come into the conversation here, right? So in our episode where we were talking about ages 6 months, or really, 6 months to 12 months, we talked about introducing solids. We talked about focusing on iron-rich foods. We talked about how, they're really still getting most of their nutrition from breast milk, like they're getting their calcium from breast milk or formula, and they still need to get that vitamin D supplementation as well. But this is this fun exploratory phase where babies are getting used to new textures and new flavors. And, I mentioned the approach of baby-led weaning, where you're allowing the baby to choose what foods they want to eat and allowing the baby to feed themselves so that they can develop that more just beautiful connection with their own body's messages of hunger and satiety, and they can learn to self-regulate in that way. And this is the phase that we're in currently right now with Grace, and it's a lot of fun. But some nutrients, just to kind of be aware of in this phase, omega-3 fatty acids. The baby's still getting this from breast milk, as long as the mother is having a good source of omega-3 in her diet. So, for me, algae oil. Iodine, still getting from mother's milk, as long as the mother has a good source of iodine. And vitamin B12, the baby is still getting this from mother's milk, as long as the mother is supplementing with B12. But then when we get to 12 months, this is when, many babies might begin to start to wean themselves, or maybe the mother chooses that, that she wants to start the weaning process, or whatever it is, after 12 months is where the AAP says that, the baby can shift to cow's milk or a calcium fortified soy milk or pea milk. Around this age, they would no longer need to, substitute mother's milk with formula, for example. So around 12 months is really when the baby is starting to get the majority of their nutrition from food, if not all of their nutrition from food. So in this age range, the focus, one of the nutrients that really gets a lot of attention is calcium, because if you take mother's milk, out of the baby's diet, that was their main source of calcium. And so this is why cow's milk is such a popular food for toddlers, because cow's milk is a very convenient source of calcium, but also vitamin D, and also fat and protein. So it's just a really good calorie dense and calcium dense food or beverage for the baby. And that's why with plant-based babies, the recommendation is, if they stop breastfeeding, to replace that with a calcium fortified soy or pea milk. We talked all about that debate in that episode, so you can go listen to more of that there. But also, just a reminder that if the baby does continue breastfeeding and gets at least 3 good kind of nursing sessions in the day, they're going to be getting enough calcium, because the calcium in mother's milk is actually more highly absorbable than the calcium in, soy milk, for example. But this is also in this age, and I will say for all ages moving forward, when we're talking about nutrition for kids, adolescents, and teens, the nutrients that we want to be aware of, if they are plant predominant or plant-based, are calcium, like I just talked about. We, need around, it's 1,000 to like 1,300 milligrams of calcium, depending on the age, because, these kids are growing. They're growing, their bones are growing, and they need the mineralization for their bones. Also need to be aware of vitamin D supplementation. Once again, just because there often isn't a reliable source in the diet. Also need to be aware of omega-3 fatty acids, or DHA. It's been shown to be so helpful for brain development, and there's really not a good source in many kids' diets unless they're eating a lot of seafood. And so bringing in an algae oil supplement is also very helpful. And this could be something as simple as a liquid omega-3 supplement, where you add a few drops in a kid's smoothie or one of their beverages throughout the day. Vitamin B12, this goes for all ages in a plant-based diet. This will need to be, a supplement that comes with us through life. And then iodine, we think that, a plant-based source of iodine is seaweed. I've talked about this in almost every episode. Really, it can be a better idea to just bring in kind of a multivitamin that has a regular standard dose of iodine in there, to just ensure that the kiddo is getting a good kind of solid, regular dose every day, versus if we're relying on seaweed, you might go a week without eating seaweed, and then one day eat a ton of seaweed, and it's just not a reliable source of iodine. And so, yes, all of those nutrients, we kind of talked about that as well in the episode where we talked about nutrition for kids, adolescents, and teens. And and here we are. Now we're in the next episode. That was our little kind of review. But, I think one of the big questions that comes up, there's a few big questions that come up, now that we're at the end of this series. And the first is, okay, so then what happens when the kid turns 18 and is officially an adult? Does the nutrition drastically change? And no. The nutritional needs do not drastically change. The nutritional needs essentially stay the same. But you have probably heard us say in many of our episodes here in the Alter Your Health podcast that, for example, maybe some of the principles seem a little bit different for you. And so I want to just kind of focus on maybe what some of those differences are, and if they're actually really big differences, or if they're not. The first big difference that, maybe you've picked up on in this series is that there's been a higher emphasis on eating higher fat foods, or more calorically dense foods. And there's also been kind of a higher focus on like embracing some of these more healthy processed foods, like, for example, whole grain pastas and breads, things like that. And so these are foods that generally, we kind of relate to as yellow light foods when we're talking about adult nutrition, or we're talking about nutrition with the aims of trying to reverse disease, like reverse heart disease, reverse metabolic issues, etc. And in pediatric nutrition, or, nutrition for pregnancy, or, postpartum phase, we really kind of like embrace these high fat foods, and, we'll call them like convenience foods, these whole grain breads and stuff. We embrace them as actually being helpful and being really beneficial. And I'll just remind you all, the reason why these foods are beneficial in these growth phases of life is because in these growth phases of life, we generally need more energy, we need more calories. And sometimes, whether it's a pregnant woman who has nausea, or, not as much room in her stomach due to, her abdomen being filled up by her growing baby, or in the other context of like you've got a 5-year-old kid who's got a smaller stomach. In these cases, many times those populations of people aren't able, or it's not as easy for them to meet their calorie needs when they're focusing on high fiber whole plant foods. But when we bring in a little bit of help from, more avocados, more nut butters, for example, or more whole grain breads or more whole grain pastas, it's so much easier for these people to meet their calorie needs so that they can support the healthy growth and development that needs to happen in these phases of life. But when we look at an adult, and especially an adult who's maybe wanting to reverse heart disease or wanting to reverse type 2 diabetes or wanting to reverse an autoimmune condition, it's not so important that we're focusing on, bringing in more calories and supporting that growth. Now, we certainly want to make sure we are meeting our calorie needs. And you hear us say that in almost every episode. We need to make sure we're eating enough. But in the context of being an adult, and especially an adult who's wanting to reverse disease, we want to focus more on nutrient density rather than calorie density. And so that's why many times in our episodes talking about adult nutrition, we are really emphasizing eating as many of our foods, making sure that as much as our food as possible is whole foods, or as much of our diet. What am I trying to say? Just essentially that every bite of food we eat is as nutrient dense as possible. And the way to do that is to focus on whole plant foods and to focus on our carbohydrate rich whole plant foods and focus less on the fat rich foods or the convenient kind of whole grain breads and pastas and things like that. So hopefully that's a distinction that's pretty clear, that I've made here. But, I do just want to say, like, if you've got a healthy teenager who's chosen themselves that, they want to continue eating plant-based when they move out of the house or whatever, if they continue to enjoy their nut butters, enjoy their avocados, enjoy their whole grain bread into adulthood, they're going to continue to be healthy and thrive. It's completely fine for an adult to have a little bit of a higher, fat intake in their whole food plant-based lifestyle. Let's say it's not 10 to 15%, but it's 20 to 25%. They're going to continue to still be healthy because they grew up with this solid foundation of nutrition. They didn't, develop any insulin resistance or, plaque formation in their arteries in, 18 years of eating whole food plant-based. So why would they moving into adulthood? When we're talking about, once again, really eating whole food plant-based for reversal of heart disease and metabolic issues and things like this, that's where keeping the fat closer to 10 to 15% has been shown to be really, really helpful. And, I just want to share, like, this is actually a good segue into this other topic that has really come up for me as a mother, as I've been going through, pediatric nutrition and especially plant-based nutrition and, learning about, the nutritional needs, but considering the implementation of this in the household, and also how to really support our kids in having a healthy relationship with food. And it's such a loaded topic, but I feel like I just wanted to share a few of my reflections, that have come up in this process, because the truth is that I think a lot of people do get interested in whole food plant-based nutrition as a response to wanting to fix some kind of health problem, right? But it's a whole nother thing when we're talking about just like raising healthy kids with plant-based eating, because, I think it's so important that we just recognize that our kids, obviously, they have their own wisdom. They will be making their own decisions when they're older. We can't force our ideals and, expectations on our kids. They're living their own lives, right? And I think that especially when kids move into their teenage years, and, I'm just sharing personally. I'm not an expert in this, obviously, because I don't have any teenage kids or anything. But, especially I think when kids enter their teenage years, this is when the relationship with food can start to get a little complicated. There's societal norms and societal pressures, and, whether it's like societal norms around eating certain types of foods and kids wanting to go out and have, pizza and candy and soda and all that stuff. But then on the flip side of things, there's all these like weird societal norms from media for, how to look and body image. And I know this is where a lot of kids can feel conflicted around, they can just start having more difficult relationships with their own body and then also with food. And so for me, I've really been thinking about, okay, what do I want the message to be at the dinner table around food and nutrition? And what comes to mind is actually something that I was talking to my friend about this because my friend grew up in a household with a lot of healthy food. Her mother was a nutritionist. And I was sharing with her, like I've heard of some situations where, really kind of promoting healthy eating in the child's childhood can kind of backlash. Like, for example, if the mom never had any sugar cereal around and then they go to their friend's house and all the kid wants to do when they're at their friend's house is binge on sugary cereal. And she was talking with me about her experience, and I really, really appreciated it because she said, what was so cool about my mom was that she always made like really healthy and delicious meals, totally balanced meals, but she also never like shamed us or made us feel wrong if we went out and, ate non-healthy food at our friend's house or at, the restaurant or whatever. There was no kind of restriction kind of energy around it. It was just like, all right, yeah, like here's a healthy meal. At our house, we eat these delicious, beautiful, healthy, fresh meals. And, you're your own human. When you're out of the house, you make your own decisions. And to me, I thought that was kind of a really beautiful message because it really honors the wisdom in the child. It's, the parent honoring the wisdom in the child. And it doesn't create any of that awful feeling of constriction or restriction, which I think can oftentimes really backlash. And the other thing that so anyway, I just think that maybe that's something I'm going to remember as I go into my years of, being a parent of an older kid. And also, the whole conversation around animal products. I mean, haven't even really talked about that in these podcast episodes here, but I do feel like, I don't know, creating any kind of rules or restriction around even animal products is probably just going to be a disservice and not, allow the kid to make their own decisions, because ultimately the kid is going to be an adult one day making their own decisions, right? So just how can we be supportive and loving parents that create that healthy, peaceful environment around food, and just model what healthy, nutritive eating looks like? Yeah. I guess I also just want to say, while we're talking about this whole relationship with, food and body image and all that stuff that can come up, I feel inspired to share that one thing that I've been doing with Grace every morning, my daughter, is that we'll sing this very sweet song in the mirror. I think it's by an artist called Mother Moon, I think is the artist. And the song goes like this. I'll just sing it. It's a very quick little jingle. It goes, I love my body from my head to my toes. I love my face, my eyes, my mouth, my nose. I love the way I look when I look in the mirror. I stand a little closer just to see a little clearer. Who is that? It's me. And I am looking good as good can be. So what do we say? We tell ourselves we love us every day. And I just love this message. I love this message. And I do think that I have a belief that it's going to support also my children in creating healthier relationships with their own bodies. And so anyway, I just wanted to kind of share those reflections, because I know that in, my sharing here on the podcast around nutritional information, there is the potential that someone can take that out of context and create, restrictive behaviors and beliefs around it. And that's never, ever my intention. It's my intention is just to share the information around, simply nutritional needs, what the science is saying around plant-based nutrition. And on that note, I'll just share on this very happy, wonderful point that whole food plant-based nutrition is just so wonderful in supporting health and thriving in all phases of life. And maybe I'll just end it right there, because we've got 300 other episodes in this podcast that you can go listen to. Just, really emphasizing that point more and more and more in different specific areas, right? So at this point, everyone, I'm going to wrap up our whole food plant-based nutrition life cycle series. I know we didn't get to like graceful aging, that whole discussion, because that discussion needs its own series. So stay tuned, because that will be coming down the pike, as well as another wonderful mind-body series from Dr. Benjamin coming up. So stay tuned. We've got so much more coming your way on the Alter Your Health podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in to this series, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.